Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. And this is a repeat. We've got our first second-time guest. My buddy Colin Dimock joined us previously, and we had some audio issues, so we're having him back. Colin, thanks so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me back. I regret that we don't have the good audio on the first one, but here we are.
The first one was just so much better than this one. Already it's a shame that genius has been lost to the ages.
Yeah.
So, Colin, how did you get your start GMing?
So it goes back a ways. So I first got into games through an interest in miniatures games, which I didn't really play very much, but we really wanted to when I was a kid. This is elementary school time. And then the Avalon Hill games.
Are these the old Brawl Partha? Or the
No, we're talking before that. We're talking about Airfix. My brothers played with some Romans and some Gauls, the old plastic Airfix 72.
Oh, right, yeah.
$1 a package. And I was not in the game, and I was jealous. And that caused me to start researching miniature war games. And very quickly, I found a book on designing miniature games in the library, public library. This is me in third grade or whatever, or fourth grade maybe. And so I started designing my own version of it because the bug hit me really bad. And at the same time, my eldest brother started getting some of the Avalon Hill games, and we started doing those. So I got into game design at a very early age. And as you know, I also do board game design, but I haven't really been doing that lately. Hopefully I'm going to get back into that soon. But so it really started with that. And I made a game called 10 Continents. It was the first game I played, not by myself, with another person, with my friend Pat Schaefer, who we met in junior high school, first year of junior high school. And in this game, you play a wizard, and you're marching around a hidden landscape that's being revealed as you go, and you meet people, and you either have to fight them because they're enemies, or you recruit them into your forces, or get some benefits from them. And you build up this army, and you face down the big bad at the end. Is the hope. It's a big exploration kind of thing, and obviously very Lord of the Rings influenced. So I had decided I wanted to make a version of this game that was smaller, because we had these big armies. I wanted to make it like smaller, like a group of heroes. And so I made these rules to try and do it. And I tried to test play it. There was just too much going on. It just couldn't be done. It was just too complicated. It just wasn't. And so that went kind of into the scrap heap. So about the same time I'd been hearing about role-playing, this is, I think I first saw one of the D&D original set books in 77, but I didn't get a chance to look at it. Some other older kid had it, and I saw it from the outside, but didn't get to thumb through it. And when I started junior high school, and again, this is 78, I started asking around. I got very, very bad information people didn't know. But that Christmas, Pat's mom got him the basic set. And he ran 2 sessions out of that basic set. And I said, oh, that's what I was trying to do the whole time. So I went to the scrap heap, brought that stuff out, and created my first role-playing system. And we played the heck out of that system. It evolved over time, and I could give you all sorts of history. I'll call Shannon Appelkline, and he can do a book on it. But we played that through just into the early 2000s. We played that same system.
Wow. So what was it sort of D&D with more chrome, or was it?
Oh, no. It was, me as a punky junior high schooler rejected very soundly a lot of the basic tenets of D&D. I hated class level systems from the very beginning. I just didn't like it. Now, the first system I made at the very early days, we didn't have progression. It was all kind of these extended one-shots, and you'd do this one thing. And so there wasn't a progression thing originally. And then very early on, I met the Fantasy Trip, which came out in these little magazine format, literally like a magazine. There were 3 of them, one for the general adventure, and one for Magic, one for Melee. I think there were $3 a piece. And I read that. I've never played it, by the way. I've never played a single game of the Fantasy Trip, but I read that and I'm like, oh, skill-based system. This is how it's supposed to work. This is what I want. And so I very quickly went in the direction of skill-based systems and never looked back.
Was it percentile or?
No, I originally, when I was first playing the system, I didn't have polyhedral dice, so it was all D6 based, entirely D6 based, not even a pool. I used 2d6 to break it into a 1 to 36 curve.
When my brother and I, this would be around 75, 76, maybe a little later, but we got D&D before we got dice. And so we would flip coins.
Yes, I remember hearing about that one of the earlier episodes of this that you did.
Yeah, we would flip coins to see if you won a fight, and it was not a satisfying resolution system, but you do what you can with what you got.
Ahead of the time, if you'd been just a little bit more firm on that, you could have had a modern design,
That's right, yeah.
Way back in the 70s.
Yeah. And so were you always the GM in those groups?
No. So
oh wait, your friend was the GM for a while.
Well, he was just for those two things. I took over. Well, so he started GMing those two. We went back and forth, and he kind of made a variant of my system. But once I started high school, we kind of formed up a group there, and there's a whole story to that, of course. But pretty soon, the other people who I was playing with wanted to GM. So 3 of them went on to be GMs. 3 out of 4 of them went on to be GMs as well. And we actually added my college roommate started GMing quite a bit as well. Once you get through all the way through the 2000s, we had quite a few people GMing that system.
Wow, that you created a little GMing cult there in Southern California.
Yeah, a little bit. And my newer system, which is my newer system that I've been using as kind of a high fantasy, if you will, system. I think we've got a couple other people who've GM'd that too now. But
so you're a high fantasy guy, not low fantasy?
I'm both, really. I say high fantasy, and I think it really would count as high fantasy, but there's some definite low fantasy elements to it.
I'm low fantasy all the way.
Yeah, you're a Warhammer.
Well, yeah, I like Warhammer, but I just love, I love the idea of, magic. Like one of my big issues with with D&D in particular, but with many high fantasy games, is that Magic doesn't have the dynamic, like world changing ability that, like, freaking a cantrip, prestidigitation is what would change the world,
Yeah.
and like it never reflects that. Like, I want to play a world where, like, magic has, it's almost like when you play D&D, you live in a world where nobody realizes that death doesn't matter.
So for me, my version of that same thing is that, you want to have magic work like it does in a book, or, the fantasy books before the fantasy books were being written to emulate D&D, as it were.
Yeah.
You go back and look at Tolkien, and you can count on one hand the number of times, Gandalf does something that's quote unquote magic.
Right.
And you can, go through Galadriel explaining the magic of the elves, and those are the magic items that they have in the thing, and they're like, well, I mean, you think they're magic, but we just think they're rope. It's just rope.
Right.
So it's a different thing. So you want to try and capture that. So boy, we've gone right into the weeds in this topic.
I'm all for it, man.
We have this. This was the original Old Fantasy. It's the one that I ran through in the 2000s, early 2000s. I wanted to make something that was much grittier than that, and so I really made some low fantasy systems. Some of them were really harsh, and one of the things I wanted to do with that was get away from hit points. I wanted to get rid of the abstraction of hit points, and really have something where the wounds were the direct effect, and they had the impact that they had. And so I created some systems. I've created quite a number of those systems. Generally, they end up in the archive bin because they're just too cumbersome to go. And this system that I've been running since, I don't know, I've been running it more than 5 years, 6 years. Oh gosh, more than 7, 8. Let's call it 10 years. It's not quite 10 years probably, but whatever. This system has kind of cracked that for me a bit. So there are no hit points. It's all wounds based and whatnot. The original systems I did like this, I never made magic systems for them. We just never got that far. Maybe the last one before this had a little bit, but they just didn't get developed. And so those were very low fantasy. And they had some absolutely terrific moments because of that. Low fantasy gives you a very different feel, and it can be very, very cool, very different experience. So we were playing the old fantasy at the same time as this is going on, and pretty high fantasy, pretty heroic, as people get up there in levels. Well, there weren't levels, but whatever, as they increase in power. But they made a group once, which was, they decided that they wanted to do a ninja themed group. So they made ninjas. So they're we're kind of doing a fantasy Japan kind of situation. They made ninjas. The very first time they got their first adventure and they're going up, and there's this samurai shows up, and they realize, oh, that guy has armor. We do not have armor. That guy knows what he's doing. That guy's going to cut us to ribbons. And so they realized, we do not in any way want to fight this. And it caused them to act like ninjas. Right?
Sneaking around. And
instead of a ninja in a high fantasy system who just jumps in the room, flings around, throwing stars and everybody's dead or whatever, they had to really sneak around a lot. Through the rafters, under the floors. They did a lot of that. With a surigami getting lowered down in the night to hook the guy's sword and pull it up into the rafters so that, to disarm him before the battle. All these kind of things. Very different decisions.
Yeah. And I think, one of the other thing I think that systems like Warhammer and things like that with low fantasy do is, you might take wounds in a battle and it will be days before those wounds are fully healed. And so you're like, I think in my current group, I have one person who can't use their left arm, and has dislocated it, and they still have to find a doctor and is down so many wounds. And so you kind of have to, it's from a GMing perspective, the balancing of combat becomes a little more difficult because, you have to balance on the fly to where they are now.
It can. So like Warhammer Fantasy, this system, the wounds take unless you've got some magic up your sleeve, the wounds take a long time to heal, and you need someone on your team who can provide basic medical care, or it's going to get really rough really quick. And the wounds just aren't going to, they inhibit you. A, they have an impact on you that can be pretty severe, and B, you're just not going to heal those really soon. So that changes the way you have to go through things. Now, this system, I let go of some of that, harshness, so that I could open it up to, other players who weren't, for experienced players, low fantasy can be a pretty cold bucket of water to start, and it really limits the type of characters you can make. And people,
I'm going to push back on that because you can, like, for instance, in our Warhammer group, we did everything randomly because that's how Warhammer works. You roll everything, and we got a good breadth of characters. Now, I will say we don't exactly, like, our closest thing to a fighter is a warrior priest, but he's pretty fighterly, but like, but unnormal for Warhammer. Almost the entire party can read, which gets rid of my favorite part of any low fantasy game is having a party that can't read and giving them notes.
Yeah,
never gets old for me. Never gets old. Well, so we've talked about fantasy, but really, you and I both have an abiding love for Call of Cthulhu and for, I don't know if I can call what I do horror gaming, but you definitely bring in more horror elements. And so how did you get your start GMing Cthulhu?
So, so a lot of the people, especially in Northern California, I'm known as Cthulhu DM, Kubla Khan and Dunder Khan and all like that, Dead of Winter, all that. People know me as a Cthulhu DM, and really the start to that. So I was doing game design, board game design, and I realized that I was working much too insular. And this is 2003, I think, before all the board game design groups have been created and protospiels are out there and all that. There wasn't the same support network. But I realized that playing with my friends and even people I knew just wasn't enough to test. And I needed to be less insular. So I started looking for conventions. I hadn't been to a convention in a long time. And I started looking for conventions. And I stumbled upon Kubla Khan, which at that time had a very robust game design track, in terms of seminars and that kind of thing, and they still do some of that, not as much as they did back then, but they still do some of that. So I convinced Nick, hey, I didn't want to go alone, so I convinced Nick, let's go up to Kubla Khan. I want to do this thing. And there were two things that he was interested in particularly. We were both interested in playing Call of Cthulhu, because at this time I have not actually played a game of Call of Cthulhu at my first Kubla Khan.
Wow.
I was aware of it, but I hadn't actually played. And the other thing was dice. There was not a lot of, the game stores had really droughted out in the area, so it was hard to get dice. And so he's like, do you think that they'll have dice? I'm like, I'm sure they're going to have dice. It's going to be great.
Do they have dice?
Holy mackerel. That was like nirvana when we walked in and saw that booth for the first time. And, if you've been there and you just saw the photos from DunderCon, same thing. You see that thing, you're like, oh my gosh, all the dice in the world. Of course, let's not go down the rabbit hole of dice, because that's changed a lot in the last 2 years too. But so we made good on the dice promise when I promised him the dice. So we show up there Friday. We probably roll in at about 4 o'clock or something like that, 3 or 4 o'clock, because we drove up. And there's a Call of Cthulhu game, that evening, Friday evening, and we're like, okay, well, we don't know how this works. How's it work? And we talked to someone. They said, oh, you can just go, since it was the first session and they didn't have it through the randomizer. They're like, oh, just go and show up. So we went to the room where this is going on. Now, in the room was a woman who looked the most haggard-looking DM I've seen. She was like done already. We haven't even started. And there are 12 people in the room. Because different con staffers at that time had told people different stories. Some said, first come, first serve, and some had this sign-in sheet. So you had two groups of 6 people who absolutely believed that they had a right to a chair, and a DM who had no real easy way out, because both of these messages came from con staff inadvertently, which is not a reflection on Kubla Khan, which I think is wonderful. So we walked into this, 2 guys, and we're like, hey, is there any room for this game? And we just got the look of death from 13 people. Just like right there. And we were unable to get into any Call of Cthulhu role-playing events. In fact, role-playing events in general that we were trying to get into was very difficult, but Call of Cthulhu particularly. So when we went home from that, we had a good experience with a number of other things at Kubla Khan. When we went home for that, I said, well, there's an obvious need for Cthulhu games at Kubla Khan. I'm going next year.
Looking for the market inefficiencies
That's
here.
That's right. I'm gonna run Call of Cthulhu. That's just what I'm gonna do. And I found just soon after that, like 2 months after we got back, at a used bookstore, I found a copy of 4th edition, 5th edition, which is nice because it wasn't as hard to read as 6th edition.
Right.
It's the same. It's basically the same, not quite as hard to read.
Yeah. Up until 7th, not much changed.
Yeah, 7th was a fairly big change for the better, I think. Overall.
A much better. Yeah, I agree.
So I got that, and I started, I set to work and I wrote my first Call of Cthulhu adventure. I ran it at home, I think just once. I think I tested it just once at home. Maybe I found another group to do it and tested it twice. I'm not sure I even have records of that. And I went and ran it at Kubla Khan. And by the Kubla Khan after that, I had a fan base. So, it was good to go. I ran 2 the Kubla Khan after that, and I've been running ever since.
One of the things, you are, I think one of your real strengths is you have very well thought out scenarios that are puzzle. There's definitely puzzles involved, but you still have a good story. There's still a story, and there's still the horror element. I really struggle with integrating puzzles into the game, partly because of my own, hang-ups and that sort of thing. But how do you go about formulate? Do you have a puzzle and then you sort of build a scenario around it? Because like, I'll just use an example. You have one very intricate puzzle that I recall in a game that is based around sound design, and the players have to use a mix. That the characters use a mixer. The players are making dice rolls, and you give them different versions of the audio file based on what happens. And so, and it's organic and it's important to the scenario and all that stuff. So, did you come up with the puzzle and then build the scenario? Like, walk me through that.
So, I'm trying to organize in my brain how to do that. But I'll start big and I'll go small. So I am different from some people. I'm not an on the fly guy. I do a lot of prep. I'm not an improv guy, generally speaking, and which not to say one is better than the other. They're different. They give you different results. But I approach it the same way as advice I heard for if you're going to be a writer. One of the pieces of advice I heard was, well, make your first book a mystery. Because if you're writing a mystery, you have to know what happens before you start writing. If you just try and write a mystery and just kind of go along and let's see what the characters do, it's not going to make sense at the end, And so you really have to have this idea. So for me, it generally starts with some image or idea or whatever. Some kernel is the idea of it, and then that kind of develops into kind of scenes in my mind in a way, little kind of what might happen, how might it be, and then the mystery of how you get to that evolves from that process. But I do take a lot of pains to get that. Now, a lot of the work I do, it takes time, but not necessarily a lot of work during a lot of time, because a lot of that's just on my 101 commute, pondering, imagining what, just thinking about it. And you really, for me, you really have to for this kind, you have to have a very solid idea of what has happened and what is happening and what's going to, happen if the characters fail or succeed or whatever it is. And this gives you scenes, which include environments, occurrences and whatnot. And then you put pointers that go between those things. One of the really important parts of designing it in that way, there's two things I'll say. So you do a lot of planning ahead of time, and then it hits the table and you let it all go, right? That planning is just to give you the depth so that you can run it, right? They're going to do something completely different from what you're expecting. But at least what the reality is in the game so that you can keep up. It supports the improv. There's always an improv element, right? So, I talk about the prep versus the improv. It's really a continuum that everybody's on. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
Some are more so than the others. Even if you have the games where you walk in where it's code generated, you're bringing a wealth of experience to that is, impacting what you're going to do. So you do have to let go of that wheel. The other really important part of doing a scenario like this is not to have single points of success or single points of failure, right? You've got to be careful that you haven't written yourself the thing that they could, if they do this and this, they're just done. And now we've got 5 hours to talk about what
the classic Call of Cthulhu conundrum of the old days of, you failed that spot hidden roll, so you didn't find the key that would open the door that, and I think gaming in general has sort of transcended that. But to your point, like making failure interesting and and having multiple paths is super important, like as you kind of map out where you're going.
Right. And I'm not talking about fail forward in this case necessarily, because for Call of Cthulhu, I want it to feel a little helpless, if you will, a little hopeless, a little helpless. So it's not fail forward. It's there's got to be if there's something on the other side of that door that you really need to happen or have or they need to get in order for the story to go forward, you better give them a number of ways to get past that door. A number of ways, so that if they can't pick the lock or whatever, then it's a question of, well, what's the next thing you're going to try, rather than, oh, well, you didn't get that. I have during games made a couple of mistakes on things that I just assumed that they would get because, you know, they're literally right there. Well, what has happened has not been that they haven't got it. It's that one player has gotten that and then refused to share that information.
Yeah.
Not common, but it has happened. And
it's always Shannon.
It's not always Shannon, as it turns out, but I won't name names.
You know,
it could be Shannon.
I mean, but that's, you know, some of that is true. I think no matter what system or what kind of game you're running, you know, I always give the example, if you're running a dungeon crawl, you know, have 4 really cool rooms, and whichever way they go, those are the 4 rooms they go in. You know, you don't like the whole, like, I go left at this, you know, right, left, right. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part are the cool encounters that you have. And so those encounters should happen regardless. Like, if you've got a great room over on the right and they go left, that room's going to the right, you know. So,
and now I'm going to disagree with you. And I get what you're saying. This is Schrodinger's ogre, or whatever monster you want it.
Schrodinger's displacer beast.
Right, which is, you know, you got door A and door B, and you want them to fight an ogre, so it doesn't matter which door they pick, that's the room with the ogre in it. You just flip the map or whatever. So I have a couple of problems with that. Well, and the best advice is, if you want them to fight an ogre, you shouldn't have 2 doors.
Right.
Don't have 2 doors if there's not really going to be a choice. Don't. Despite the fact that a lot of what we do as DMs is an illusion of choice,
right?
You don't get quite that discreet about your illusion of choice, because agency has to matter. And this is where some of those ideas I push back on, because as soon as there's a chink in that and the players start to understand that that's the game that's being played, the agency starts flowing out of that crack, and you start losing that. And this is one of the reasons I'm a little hesitant to go. It depends on the game. One shots are one thing, but campaigns are another. But I'm a little hesitant to. So the rule of the cool is another tool that we all use, and again, it's a spectrum. It's not, whatever. I kind of have to keep a certain level of logical limits on that, because otherwise it becomes a battle of will between you and your players, and players and other players, right? As some players just try to be cooler so their stuff can happen. And if you've got a player who's not as vocal, not as quick, not as whatever, they just lose. That's just a game that's just a losing game for them. So I definitely want always there to be a situation where, there are exceptions because there's different games that are different, but especially we'll say in Cthulhu, I want them to feel that there is a world with hard and fast rules out there, and they can absolutely lose. And they frequently do.
And right? One thing I think you do a great job of in your games is making, you write in every character a chance to shine. So like all of the characters, and that's a lot of work on the pre-gens. You put in the pre-gens, okay, you've got a high drive skill, there's going to be a car chase. You've got this, and that is super important. If you're running a game, I even go so far, if I'm running not a con game, if I'm running a campaign game, I'll say, tell me 2 skills you want to use. Those skills will come up. If there's 2 things you want to do, they will definitely happen. And in a one shot, you just sort of, you can manufacture that.
Yeah. So, kind of going back to the way that, the original adventure's written, I always have, there's a lot of scene mapping and character mapping that goes on as part of this, the interrelations and whatnot. But part of the thing I do is I always start with this idea there's got to be at least 3 or generally 4 ways to win the Call of Cthulhu adventure. Even if it's unlikely they're going to win at all, there's like a science way, we're just going to fight way, which generally is the hardest way.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
Requires quite a bit of luck, but can happen. There might be a magic or occult way. There, various kinds of knowledge, a stealthy way, whatever it is. Because once you have these, say, 4 ways, now you have characters and replacement characters as well. That's a whole art form to the right too. So the characters fit into and support these ways to go through it. And in some cases will support this way hard and this way a little bit. And that way, when the debates come up, there's this participation in multiple ways. And often it means that even when the group is working together, they're weighing their options the whole way through the adventure. And they may even solve part of the scenario with one of those ways and a different part of the scenario in another way. And I generally think of the combat success path as being everything fell apart. Now we failed. Now we're going to just try and fight our way out of it and see if we can make it work. And generally it doesn't, but occasionally.
So do you actually, like when walk me through one of those, like a scene map, like what are, if somebody wants to sort of start building these and hasn't done it before, like what's a sort of a basic scene map look like?
So, I'll make a reference also to people might look at, Ben Riggs does the podcast Plot Points, and he put out a little book that is encounter theory. And he has this kind of thing where he says, even social encounters and whatever, you should think of them, organize them in your mind a little bit like a dungeon. He says, by the way, he hates dungeon delving. He's back in the day, he was really a Vampire the Masquerade guy. But, starting out, which you probably were too, because you're a theater guy. So they generally.
You know what? I hate Vampire. Okay. I never got into that. I don't actually like modern games. I don't know why. Yeah. I want, like, I'm fine with the 20s and that sort of thing. But like, if I'm playing, like, the only modern game that I run, you're all super normal, sad people. It's a family reunion, and
I know what you're talking about.
It's much more about the like interdynamics of the family than it. I don't know why, but I just have a weird thing about modern games.
What about sci-fi? Do you do sci-fi or just?
I like sci-fi.
Okay. All right. So I'm kind of with you in there. Though one of the things I like about Call of Cthulhu, it's a common introduction game, gateway game I use for people because I set it modern day, and so it takes so little for people to start. They know who their character is, right? They don't have to understand what, some magical creature is or some magic or arcane stuff or whatever. They don't have to understand this, how their warp drive works, any of that. It's like, you're you, here you are. This is, I'm good at
You've got a 40% chance to do that. It makes sense.
I used to use a game I had, one of my own designs, which was a spy thing for exactly the same reason. It's modern, especially with guys. They get really, of a certain type. They get really obsessed about what kind of gun they have. They really enjoy picking out their guns. And generally, stat-wise, they're not that different. I could get into that too, but I won't. Back to Ben Riggs. So Plot Points, he uses the dungeon as a good organizing method, which is to say your rooms are your encounters. And you've got hallways. So you go into a room, you do stuff. That room, by going into that room and doing that room, it points you towards other options, right? Because there's 2 doors out of that room, right? And so, you might have reasons. Generally, it's better if they have reasons to pick one or the other. Maybe there's a conflict about which one's, but whatever. But so he kind of organizes in that sense. So I will literally make a map where I have a scene, an important thing that I think is likely to, not necessary. Generally, there's very few necessary moments to get, because you want the multiple paths to get to that final thing. Yeah. And I will literally draw lines about what this scene, this location, whatever it is, occurrence, scene, location, what other scenes will it point people to, right? What will it drive people to do? Oh, at this thing, they're likely to, if they find this clue and this clue, they're going to see this as an option. If they chase this guy, he's going to lead them to the sewers. Okay, that's, so you can literally point that out and see the flow of how it might get to the end point. Now, again, they often walk in the interstitial spaces between those paths I've drawn, right? And you get this kind of organic collection of different clues and ideas and options that lead them to different places at different times. And that's where so to me, the magic with role playing is that unknown, that chaos that comes up. So I'm a big fan of dice, and I'm a big fan of, let the dice fall where they are and just accept that failure is just as fun as success, as long as you do it right. It can be just as essential for character development, all that stuff, and just make it so that the game can move forward despite that. I mean, short of total party kill, right? And this is why I have a replacement character in Call of Cthulhu. My Call of Cthulhu adventures are pretty harsh. So if I have a 6-player, I generally run for 6 players in 6 hours. That's my preferred format. If it's a scenario that's I don't deem too harsh, I'll generally have 4 replacements. I might have as many as 8 if I think it's a adventure where there's going to be a body count that's significant. And one of the things I do is those replacement characters will often have information or abilities or something that drive that story forward, that really open things up. And you have some that are kind of late game adds that can really say, all right, I'm sticking this character in here. This is going to get you from here to here, because this person already knows blah, 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 blah. This person was part of the cult. They know the secret doors, they know, whatever it is.
And that goes back to really intentionally creating your pre-gens and having, now don't create a pre-gen and that is the key to everything, and then not have that character be introduced. That's a big, that's actually, it can be a challenge. But like, if I think that's a great tip to have, like, if somebody dies, the character that's coming in has something that's going to drive things forward, and keeps things moving.
Right. And you can pick the replacement characters to be supportive of the direction the group is going, various things. It's very situational. The other thing that's important with the pre-gens for me is, that's probably the part that takes the longest for me, is writing the characters, the pre-gens.
Yeah.
Because I write in the character map often with the other characters, so that they have and you have to express that. And I express that in a narrative kind of format. Oh, you're like this, and you did this, and then this happened, and whatever, and oh my gosh, you feel this way, and this is your brother, and blah, 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 whatever. Out of that narrative, they need to be able to pick up how they feel about the other people in the group they know, and who they are, how they, some clues as to who they are and what they're like and whatnot. The character that's played is always a mashup of that pre-gen that I wrote and the player who's playing it. So it's never the same, but you want to give them those clues. And the other thing I very frequently do is I write in an immediate thing for them to interact with 1 or 2 other characters in the group. Oh, such and such still has your car keys. And it can be as simple as that to, you're really pissed off at such and such because they did this thing, and they need to apologize, whatever it is. But this way, when you have the 6 players sitting down at the table, you generally have a couple of veteran players in any group, or some people who are more go-getters. Stuff is going to happen as soon as you say go, right? As soon as you say go, they have something to do without having to have revealed a bunch of clues or whatever. It saves you from starting the adventure with a whole bunch of exposition and whatnot. Right. And then it has a conversation going amongst the players, because it's these convention one-shots are all about the player interaction. So it has that start, and then you can start inserting the weirdness that starts making them say, wait, what? What's this? And sometimes it's a big bang start, and sometimes it's a slow creep.
And you can, you can go as sort of, there are ways you can do that are not going to, like, require you to, I'll just say it, that are not as much work. Like, for instance, I will very often use Jason Morningstar, one of my favorite games. I love the Shabalhiri Roach. He has a super simple, immediate, like, thing on the game where you have a strong positive attachment to the character on your right and a strong negative attachment to the character on your left. And, I will, for that family game, I made a little map for all that. And then that's literally all I did. I like the character on my right. I don't like the character on my left. Give me a reason. And that just it makes the characters seem real. It gives them it puts some meat on the skeleton, and it gives the players something to play. When you get handed a character sheet and it just says you are a gaunt, quiet man, there's nothing there. You're telling the player to be quiet. But if you tell the player, your mother is a shrew harridan who's never liked anything you've done, that's something they can play.
Right. You can even say, you are never going to speak with that character again because of what they did to them. And they know what they did and whatever. And maybe they do that, maybe they don't over the course of the game, but it's definitely going to start a thing right at the beginning. But telling that you're a quiet character who's not going to talk, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's, you're taking them out of the game right from the first, before you start.
And I think the key difference is when you say, even if you tell someone you are the loud, talkative guy in the room, that's not focused on another character. Everything that we're talking about this is something about another character. Like, I think when I write NPC descriptions, it's very little about the character, and it's more about the other characters and your relationships and things like that, because I want the player to come up with stuff. Now, I'll put stuff in like the guy, you're a depressed salesman who's always looking for the next big get rich thing, and here's your rich uncle. You need an investor, that sort of thing. Right. But so you can use the pre-gens to give the players stuff to use immediately.
Yes, absolutely. And in a con game, it's more important than ever because you might have a table full of people who've never met before.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it's a really great icebreaker to have it the game start, especially for brand new players. That's my favorite group is 2 veterans, 2 moderates, and 2 brand new people who've never played a role-playing game before. Because they're looking at the sheet, they read it. Okay, I understand who I am because it's, whatever. It's the real world. And they're still a little uncertain. But the moment you say go, as it were, the moment they start, the 2 vets are like, hey, what were you doing with all those bowling balls the other day? I saw you sneaking those into your car. What was up with that? Well, I don't know. Whatever. And they get it. Right. Yeah. The veterans will just demonstrate what's going on. And it, by demonstrating it instead of telling them, by showing them, they will very often say, hey, wait, one of those was my bowling ball. Whatever it is, they'll get involved and they'll start doing the things that the other players are doing. And pretty soon you have a whole table that's just buzzing. And that's just a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling where you have to kind of slow down the players to insert the horror. By the way, people are dying. Oh, yeah.
I always joke that my dream scenario as a GM is I can leave and they keep going. Mm-hmm. That's always like if I'm able to remove myself and they're just interacting with each other, I'm going to let that go. Now sometimes in con games you have to move things forward just because you've got a time limit. But one of the challenges when you have that mixed group is sort of difficulty level, for lack of a better term, and sort of balance. We talked a little bit about balance, and I think there's balance in the puzzle thing. So how do you kind of make a puzzle here's a question. So you talk about you want to have multiple paths to victory. How do you make a puzzle that has that same thing where it's not just the classic is I sit down at a con table and a guy's like halfway through the game, we meet a sphinx and it's telling me riddles that the player have to understand. And I'm like, my character has an 18 intelligence. I don't.
Right. I'm not a fan of riddles.
I hate
two things I don't like in role-playing games generally is riddles, because of exactly what we're talking about, and mazes. Yep. They sound good on paper. They play like crap.
Yeah.
In general, there's a way you can do both those things to make them work, but it's not the way that it's done. So, I mean, you have to focus it around the character, not the player. I mean, Call of Cthulhu games being investigations and solving a mystery, generally they're mysteries at the core of it, mostly. there's going to be a lot of player thinking going on, right? They're going to get involved and they're going to ponder and whatnot. But the riddles, if you will, the information, all that stuff should be layman understandable, in a sense, or you have to explain what it means to that character. If it's, if they are, arcane knowledgeable, you have to explain in no uncertain terms what's going on with that, because it's really, what you're really doing isn't so much creating a puzzle or riddle. You're not giving them enough information to solve the problem, right? They go into that first big scene and they get those first clues. They shouldn't be able to finish the adventure based on those clues, with very rare exception, right? Because that's a single point of failure to the success. Because somebody could be really clever at the table and say, you know what, we should, go up to the volcano and throw all the water, or whatever, and then you're out. So it shouldn't be enough. It should be enough to point them to the next possible scenes, right? It should be enough to get them into the web. And then as they start collecting those bits of information, they move closer and closer, and you can drive them there. So I wrote a Call of Cthulhu game that is tricky on a lot. It was a tricky write for a lot of reasons. One of which is it happens over multiple days. The idea is that there's these murders going on. There's one murder each night going on. And if they get all of the 5 murders done, the bad thing happens, right? Then you end up in the final showdown scene. So the trick to that, right, is so they're attracted to the adventure because the first murder happened. So it gives them that your first scenes is really investigating that first murder. They can go to the scene and do their forensic stuff. They can talk to people who are theoretical witnesses. They also, the characters have some contacts in that area they can reach out to for other things and find out other little weird things that can go to other scenes. They can do all those kind of things. But the trick is the second murder has already happened, because they don't know it's happening nightly at that point, and they don't get there to the next day. So it's somewhere during that next day that they find out that next murder happens, and that's a way that I can just drop in. Oh, here's another big scene thing. But they're 90% likely to take that bait and go to those scenes or whatever. How they go, what element of it, I don't know, but they're gonna go to that stuff. For them to get it, for them to connect the dots, get the patterns for that third murder, theoretically possible, almost impossible. And I had one group that got in the vicinity. They got close to that third one. They missed it by minutes, which was really quite something. But once they get those 3, the likelihood that they get it on 4 is very high, or at least that they bang into the villains on that 4th one is very, very high. And by that time, the patterns are really coming out. And the 5th one has to be a little trickier because of that. But, some stuff was set up. So this is the way that there's this feeling like there's this progression that's going. What's tricky about it is it's hard to get Call of Cthulhu characters to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Right?
It's hard to get anybody to go to sleep. It's funny you say that, because I just played, I'm against all my better judgments. I'm playing a D&D game on Twitch, and we were playing this module, and the GM just needed us to go to sleep, and I was the only person who went to sleep. And she's like, and the poor GM was like, I don't know how to move forward. This is because we were supposed to have nightmares.
Yeah. It's very difficult in certain. I mean, if they're traveling, from here, whatever, you can do it. But in a Call of Cthulhu game, there's this urgency, and they do not want to stop. Yep. And so having these once per day, and that's why it's important that on the next, I could introduce that murder has already happened whenever I need to at that point. And then they get the idea from that it's happening over these multiple days. And then they're willing to let it go. Then what happens is they do a whole bunch of fury and tying things up until they get to the point where we don't really have enough information to make this happen. Maybe we're going to stake out key areas, and we're going to do this and that. They're going to do their thing, but they get to an understanding in that adventure that they need more. They need something more. They don't have quite enough. The other trick to that adventure is I have a replacement villain built in to that adventure, so that if they get that guy on the or girl, just
person,
if you get the bad person on day 3, on that third, they do really great job, and they get that person on day 3. I have someone else ready in the wings to pick up the torch and do the fourth.
That makes me think of Warhammer 3rd edition was not great. I'll stipulate that, but it had a couple of really cool ideas, and one of them in their big like tentpole module, The Enemy Within, they have a variable main villain, and the module is written so that the main villain could be one of 3 people. Mm-hmm. And you like, they'll even say, like, as you're reading the module, by now you've hopefully decided who the villain is, but like, and it's not conditional. It's not like, right, if the players go here, this is the villain. It's, you have the opportunity to make, right, one of these 3. And I love that. For my style, that is a great thing.
No, I think that's a really good way to do it, especially over a campaign, which is in some ways harder than a one-shot, in some ways easier. I think that's a great way to do it. What I don't like is a bait and switch.
Yeah.
Right, in a sense. And so it's perfectly legit, because my backup murderer is in the scenario from day 1, from the beginning, and they even interact with that person. They just don't have a real reason to suspect them. They're a little red herring-ish almost. They don't really have a big reason to suspect them until I need to pull the trigger on it. And it depends on the timing and everything that happens.
Have you ever... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to go back to the audio clue that you were talking about, which is fun, because it was another adventure I'd written where this had pulled this off really well in a campaign game, and I kind of recreated it for this. So the idea of it is that right at the beginning, the starting clues is somebody has had this dream, and their tape recorder was running because they were taking notes while they were doing it when they fell into this reverie dream, and the tape recorder somehow records the things that happen in the dream. And so this is the real, wait, this is not right. It's not what that person's saying, it's what they're dreaming that it records. But one of the persons has got this audio engineering skills. And so there's all sorts of backward mask stuff, whatever. And so I know what all the clues that are buried in that are. And they just have to say, well, I want this backwards. And then, track 4, here you go. Boom. They get that. Oh, I want to bring this out. Oh, they want to bring that.
And when you say track 4, you literally mean there's an audio, there's a CD that has all this stuff on it.
Yeah. And I've got a list of where all the tracks are. So, okay, put on the headphones. Boop. That's where you got. And the trick with that is it gets them going. There's stuff in there that automatically gets them where they're going. The rest is gravy. They don't actually need all of those audio clues, or even a significant number of them. They're basically given that, go here, and that's going to give them the next scene. Really, it's one of those things where the adventure kind of comes to them once they go to that place. But, there's a lot you can mine very usefully from it, but they don't have to have it.
Yeah, I've talked about it before, but that's kind of like I had a puzzle in a game where it was a map-based puzzle, mm-hmm. and they had like 4 clues. They knew the temple they're looking for is near a brothel. It's this and that, and there were like 4 different places it could be, and the right one was whichever one they picked. But they spent like an hour going over this map. Like, oh, it's here. It's got to be here. And I'm like, yeah, you lucked out, but you can make there's various levels of puzzles you can make, but I think the big takeaway here is make the puzzles for the characters, not for the players.
Right. So don't think about, what clever thing do they have to figure out.
Yeah.
Think about what skills are the characters going to use, and what information are going to get from those skills.
Yeah.
So the puzzle should be laying up information so that they gain confidence in a direction, rather than the players knowing a series of vocabulary words, or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah, and trust me, those players at your table will have more fun if their character does something awesome that solves the puzzle, instead of them figuring out the word scramble that everybody at the table will just enjoy that more.
Right. And that audio clue business, they don't need it, right? It's not a single stop. It's not going to stop them if they don't have it. But you've got all these weird sounds that get played for everybody. It's like, what the heck was that?
Yeah.
With all these layered sounds in there. And you have a character who's got audio, skills and audio editing equipment, right? It's pretty easy to connect those dots. And as soon as they say, what is it? If I could isolate this, what would it sound like? And you play that audio track, oh, they're gonna go. They're gonna really tear that apart, trying to figure out what they. I don't think any of us have gotten all the audio clues on there, but they generally get more than half of them.
It's a cool hook. I played a con game once where the GM had a puzzle box, and I was all set to hate this damn puzzle box.
Yeah.
But it was done in such a way that, we all would like fiddle around with it and try and get it open. But the puzzle box wasn't actually in the game. It was at the table, but it wasn't in the game. And when we got it open, we got a little, there was a cookie, there was a metaphorical cookie inside that was a little boost in the game, but it had no impact on anything. And I was like, all right, that's not a bad way. If you're going to do like something at the table, that's not a bad way to do it. To have it.
Yeah. Props are wonderful for those games. And again, I'm always thinking about how does the player skill, how's that skill set going to affect the...
Oh yeah, because I was not going to open that puzzle box. There was no, unless you give me a hammer, I was not going to open that puzzle box. But luckily we had somebody at the table who was willing. But I will say that did take that person out of the game. Yeah. Because they just sat there doing this, and that was definitely a challenge there. We're talking a lot about like how you kind of prep for games and that sort of thing. And it's interesting because I think the answers to a lot of this stuff is very different con game versus campaign game, and even, I don't know, even sandbox game versus kind of straight line game or
sandbox versus what they call on the rails, as a word.
Yeah. On the, and the funny thing is, on the rails game, I would argue every con game is on rails, whether we want to admit it or not. There are, or is rail adjacent.
Yeah, and I would argue that just about every game is, so we've heard a lot about railroading these days. It's very common to talk about railroading as a negative description of how to run a game. And we get talked about a lot about how sandbox, I like to run a sandbox game. I run a sandbox, whatever. So, and we talk about this in a continuum, and there's kind of a continuum between those things. I don't think anybody really runs a sandbox game per se. There's just too much information. You can't project what questions the players are going to ask. So there's no way to really do it. You can do a lot better than other cases. The problem, the downfall of the sandbox game, especially in heroic fantasy, is it creates murder hobos.
Yeah.
Right. If you just let them go off and do whatever, and you don't put, you don't direct them, and you don't get them on a quest, if you don't get them on some path, they're just going to murder things for treasure and experience points if your system gives them experience points for murdering people. Meanwhile, the railroad, right? And the reason that people talk negatively about the railroad is because we've had, often a lot of experiences where we're led around by the nose, and it's not the rail, the path isn't the problem. It's the unwillingness to let people stray from that path that is the problem. And so, in fact, the railroad is very helpful. Having a strong path is very helpful. And some groups want much more direction than other groups do. Some, so maybe it's just one character the group wants, so it's good to have that. I kind of like to say that the whole rail versus sandbox is kind of a false narrative for it. I think the right way to do it is you lay hooks, right? You put story hooks in there, and you see what the players bite on, and then you write that rail. You write that path. They say, oh well, we got to do something about that vampire in the castle. No, I guess we know what the next session is going to be about,
right?
Or the next 3 sessions or whatever.
Yeah, and there are, that sort of cascades down where, okay, we got to do something about the vampire in the castle. Oh, hey, we just heard there's, in the castle there's,
Right.
3 different things, and we, oh, that one, okay, so now you're going this way, and that sort of thing. I mean, I agree that I think Railroad versus Sandbox is kind of it's a false choice,
Yeah,
because
it's a false choice, yeah.
Like you can be I've got this entire scenario written out, but the players are still going to do something that's going to cause it to become sandboxy for some period of time. The players will turn it into a sandbox, and the benefit of having the spine of the railroad is that you can get them, they do an awesome thing over here. Now we're back here. Now it's it's easy to get back right on track. And similarly in a railroad game, I look at Horror on the Orient Express. Horror on the Orient Express is literally on rails, but every point is a sandbox. We go to Venice. Now who knows what happens? All right, but we know after Venice we're going to Milan. And so you're on rails in the macro sense and sandbox in the micro sense.
Right. You definitely want to give the players that narrative authority to make choices. We want to empower the players, but we also have to provide direction, and also we have to give the game master some ability to prepare, for what's going to happen next, or you end up all improv, which is a different style of game. Again, it's fine, but it's a different style of game, and it it doesn't give you the same experience. So it depends on what what you really want out of that. The trick in the example you're giving is, what if somebody decides they're going to blow up the train? Yeah,
it's happened. I mean, one of my favorite conceits in Horror on the Orient Express is that they can get off the train for a week, and then somehow magically the same ticket, they're just like, sure, come on, let's go. And I mean, and somehow another Orient Express comes rolling in, and I'm just, like that's hand waving that I am fine with. It becomes like a running joke. Although, they did blow up the train. The last time I ran it, they blew up the train, and they ended up trekking through Serbia for a while in the snow. They were really happy. They questioned their choices. Well, look, this is the second time we've done this, and we talked about completely different stuff this time. This is not the last time we will do this, because I'll let you folks know. So I have a little run of show that is, as per my usual style, like 6 bullet points. And Colin has gone through and added tons of stuff in there. So we didn't even touch on a number of different items. And actually, one thing, I'm going to stick a pin in this for when we talk again. I kind of want to walk through, like, sort of, because my style is very different from your style. So I want to just have us each create a scenario using our style, sort of back and forth. And so, like, how we see, your character map, your prep heavy thing, and my kind of less so, and how we build that story in the same way. I think there's some really interesting takeaways for both sides there.
I agree with that, because it really is. You always have to improv. You never have it's not a choice. Right. You have to improv, but I think there's benefits for, depending on what effect you're trying to get. Like, you could improv paranoia, and it's fine, because you're expecting a chaotic, very high comedy, whatever kind of a game.
Right.
I want the Cthulhu to feel like, I want the players to feel like their brain power, that they're trying to figure this stuff out, matters. Mm-hmm. And so I never want them to see behind the board and see something that's like, I'm just like, oh yeah, whatever, it didn't matter what you came up with, I was just going to make it happen. I never want them to have a chance of seeing that, because that'll break the immersion.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting for you to run something that I had written, because then you'd have it, but then you would run it in a very different way.
Yeah. I like when I run written stuff and people know it, they're like, well, that was like 60% the same. It just at a certain point you go off in a direction. But what I'm finding, interestingly, running games on stream is making me realize that I have like, I don't know, 8 ideas and I repurpose them, and so like, as I've had to sort of run games where it's recorded and people are like, hey, wait, didn't that happen already? Like I'm realizing that what I might think of as improv is maybe more sort of like I've got 8 scenarios in my head and I'm like, oh, I'll just fit this one in here and that one in there and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, this is part of the secret for improv is that the amount of experience and preparation and whatnot it takes to do improv well. I mean, there's a reason people do improv exercises a ton before they go on stage and do improv. It's so that they have this foundation to fall back on and they have points of inspiration in common to latch onto very quickly.
Yeah.
It's very difficult I mean, if I had to come up with all the ideas on the spot, I can do it. I've run whole adventure. I've had things where I've sat down, I realized this is not the adventure for the players today, and I've improv the entire session.
Right.
I've done it. It's not for every day though.
Yeah. If you do that constantly, you're going to give yourself a heart attack, because you never have that moment where you can stop and just let the players go. Instead, you're like, what's next? What's next? What's next?
Right. And it creates an environment for the players where the world is extremely chaotic, right? Yeah. And if you're living in a world where anything can happen, and that's what you're trying to create, great. If you want it to feel at all grounded, like if you tried to do that in a gritty, low fantasy setting, it can get problematic, right? Either you're going to make a mistake and start killing people, or things aren't going to be consistent enough to go with that theme, or it often works for comic effect very well though. Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. I don't want to go through a whole new lane of thought.
I know, yeah. All right. Well, you've been very generous with your time. We end every episode the same way. We've already done this, but let's see if the answers change. So, Colin Dimock, what is your favorite system to run?
Well, really, they're the systems of my own creation, typically. And I've got 3 in the works right now that are new ones that I'm working on. But
I'm interested in this low fantasy one.
What's that?
I'm interested in this low fantasy one.
Yeah. Well, which low fantasy one? But I've referenced this a comment. The kind of high fantasy one that I'm running now that has the low fantasy roots, I'm enjoying quite a bit. It's very animist. So it's a time when the bigger gods have left, but the little gods are still here. They're leaving slowly. So you have a face-to-face encounter with gods. I generally write 2 or 3 of those opportunities every adventure. So, there's a little toad god that lives in the well outside the bar, right? Who will give you information if you give it liquor and whatever. There's all these little gods that you interact with. That's one of the themes of it. And I really enjoy that one quite a bit.
That's cool. I like that idea.
For con games, I really like Call of Cthulhu because it's very accessible to new players, for any types of people. Very accessible. It draws great players, I find. I get really good player groups for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that people seek it out. The people that seek it out are the people that I like having at my table, by and large. Yeah. What is a system you haven't run that you would love to GM?
So, last time we did this, I talked about Basin and Aegon as 2 of them, and we talked a few about those. But since then, I've added a new one on the list since it's been a bit since we did that last. Since it's been a minute. I picked up Girl Interrupted, and I'm interested in doing that. So
I don't know it.
It is apparently it's a whole genre, which is the girl. I'm sorry, not Girl Interrupted. Girl Underground. Girl Interrupted is the movie. Girl Underground. Now, is it something there? It's a genre, and it's a genre from which we find Alice in Wonderland, Labyrinth. These Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
Kind of where the character, generally, often a female. It doesn't have to be a female character, but generally a female character goes into this world and has to navigate her way through it to do something and or escape. Generally escape. And it's kind of I think it's got Powered by the Apocalypse roots to it, but it's kind of interestingly structured and unstructured at the same time. I mean, one of the things that they start off on is, look, this is the genre. The question is not is the girl going to survive or is the girl going to escape? She is.
Right.
She's going to get through this, and you're finding out what the story is for her to get through that. But
so are you kind of the sidekicks?
So you're both. So the trick is the girl is played by all the players, but not simultaneously. And each player has a character, a sidekick or
follower or whatever.
A follower that they meet along the way that brings their own things to it. And so, someone will start by, the first scenes are meeting all the followers. So someone starts playing the girl, they meet the first of the followers. Now, when you go from there, it might be that person who might be playing the girl for the next follower, right? Or it could be another person who hasn't gone yet, but maybe somebody who hasn't gone yet is going to play the girl, and this follower is going to be there. And we start adding, and then we start doing the scenes that lead up to the culmination, and people can switch during that of, oh, I'm going to go back to my character who's going to play the girl, for this next thing. And so or even mid-scene, you can swap as you need to.
That's a neat idea. And you could even start to play around with some real meta stuff of each of you as a different aspect of the girl or something.
Oh, so Bluebeard's Bride kind of getting into that. Yeah. So this game does not get into that. It's fairly structured, so it doesn't get into it in that way. One of the things I really like about it is that you start off by naming the girl and the characters and whatnot that has effects, but you also start off with a series of rules, which are, a lady behaves this way, or a good girls behave in this way. And the object of the game is to break as many of those rules as you can so that you can redefine them in a new definition, and that new definition becomes a power-up for you to use in the later sessions, if you will.
That's cool idea. I really like that idea. That's a cool idea.
There's a lot of nice elements to it. But apparently Girl Underground is its own genre, and you can kind of look it up in literature for that now. But I'm really interested in running it. Yeah,
that's a really I've not heard of that game. I'm gonna have to look for that. So you hate this question, I know.
But know why I hate the question. Go ahead, ask the question.
The Space Jam question: aliens have invaded the Earth, the planet where I keep all my stuff, and they will destroy it if you don't run them a wildly entertaining 4-hour game. What are you going to run for them, Colin?
Okay, and for starters, I'm going to say that is not the plot of Space Jam. That's not how Space Jam works. And so
aren't they going to destroy the planet unless you win the basketball game?
No, they're just going to steal the basketball players.
Oh, well, that's practically destroying the planet. If I can't have Charles Barkley if I can't have Larry Bird, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but they're already, I mean, basketball has already been destroyed. But okay, let's not go there either. That's a whole other thing. But because when we first did the first recording of this, I had never watched Space Jam, so I looked it up to say, okay, well, what is the Space Jam thing?
You know what? I've only watched Space Jam once.
Yeah. Well, I looked it up, and I'm like, well, there's nothing to. Okay. I call it the Lilo and Stitch question.
Oh, all right, that's a better one. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you keep them from doing it? Well, for starters, my 4-hour game is going to be a 6-hour game, because I like that format better. And I was thinking about this just this morning. I knew this question was coming. I didn't really come up with anything better than I came up with last time, but I really want to do a game that displays something of what humanity is about, and give them a sense of humanness. And I have some new games I'm working on that might do it better, but they're not made yet. So I'll use the same answer I did last time, which is I have a Call of Cthulhu scenario, which is set in a retirement community in Texas. And it's really kind of more of a ghost story, but a lot of it is about the group centering around this widow and helping her through this ghostly events, and achieving some closure with issues of her dead husband and friends, and just all this stuff, trying to close that stuff out. And I found running that game has some really wonderful human moments in it that I think that's my best go-to for the moment.
Man, you just reminded me something else we need to talk about is mythos versus non-mythos, because you and I both run Cthulhu games where there's very little mythos involved.
Yeah, at times. Yeah, at times they're generally. Yeah, that's
to me, another subject, but to me, the mythos is the least interesting part of things, because if somebody's able to go, oh, that's a shantank, you've pulled them out of things, like.
Yeah, I almost always create my own mythos entities.
Yeah.
They fit in the mythos, but I mean, really the best part of the mythos anyways is the free reign to create stuff in it. So
exactly,
and I don't want people doing exactly that. So the most common mythos thing for me to use is ghouls, probably followed up by Yog-Sothoth, because it's so general and
ghouls are, I think, the main I'm a sucker for a deep one.
Deep ones are good too.
In my last Twitch game, I actually stole from that Pixar movie, Luca. I stole the idea that deep ones look human until they get wet. And it was wildly entertaining, because one of my players had a dalliance with a deep one and didn't realize it until things got going, and then was like, well, okay,
Well, I guess that's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, new answer to the Space Jam question. I'm gonna run Girl Underground, because if I don't run it, the world ends. I won't have a chance to run it.
There we go. I love it.
Last game in. Yeah.
At least you didn't go the nihilist route. I've had at least one person answer they were going to run a game that would make the aliens want to destroy the Earth.
show the aliens why Earth needs to be destroyed.
Yeah. I'm not going down that road. Well, Colin, we could talk for hours, and I hope we will. It is so great to see you virtually, and hopefully someday soon see you in person. You are somebody who I love playing games with, but also I just love talking games with. And when I came up with this idea, you were like the first person that I was like, this is who I want to talk to. And so we'll do this again, and I can't wait. But thanks so much for spending a little bit of a Sunday with me talking games.
Hey, thank you too. Nothing, few things I enjoy more than sitting around talking games. So there it is.
Yeah, and friends, he doesn't really have anything to plug. Is your board game still available? Bump in the Night?
So, Bump in the Night is out of print, so that's kind of hard. I know a guy. If you really have to get a hold of it, I know a guy. But
I have my copy somewhere back there.
As I kind of talked to you before we started the show, my stress level is going down right now, so I'm hoping to get back into game design and put some other stuff out. So maybe people will see me soon. But right now, the best way to see me is probably at the cons. We're not at UnderCon today, unfortunately, but maybe next year, KublaCon.
And that is what I'm going to plug for Colin. If you see GM'd by Colin Dimock in a game, use your priority slip, do whatever you got to do to get into that game. You won't regret it. It's going to be a fantastic game. All right. Well, friends, thank you so much for watching and liking and subscribing and all that good stuff, the business side of it that I really don't care about, and keep the game moving.